It is time for our final Bard video for now. We're covering the last 3 subclasses. Welcome to the Attic Dungeon. My name is Sam, and whether you really want your Bard to wear medium armor or you want to scare the crap out of people, I'm here to help you with everything. Here I am again, ready to thank you for all the attention you've given me by watching my stuff. Thank you. I'm not going to waste more time on it today. Click the subscribe button, click the bell, leave a comment, shower me with your love, and then we'll talk about Bards today. Yes, my dear people, we are doing our last Bard video, which is cool because the Bard will be the first subclass for which I can create an entire separate playlist that will cover the base class, role-playing advice, and all of the subclasses. That of course means that today we're talking about the College of Swords, the College of Valour, and the College of Whispers. 3 relatively distinct colleges that round out the options for the Bard pretty well. So as always, I'm just talking about the Bardic subclass features here, which appear at level 3, level 6, and level 14 if I'm not mistaken, and I'm not, I know I'm not. I'll be doing them in alphabetical order again. I like these 3 because they're relatively simple to talk about. It's typical for full spellcasters to have relatively simple subclass features, and the Bard is no exception to that. Though the subclass features are relatively impactful. Let's not waste any more time and move on to the Swords Bard. You should see the Swords Bard flavor-wise as a swordsman, but like for art, sword jugglers, fake fights, anything that has to do with sharp objects, knife throwing, stuff like that would all be a swords bard. And in the book they say that they can either like moonlight as half of a criminal or moonlight as half of a vigilante, whatever. There's a lot of options. It's a bard. Every bard has infinite options as what you play them. Now, what do we get at level 3? One of the first things you get is proficiency with medium armor and scimitars. Getting medium armor is nice. I mean, you're a bard, you're squishy McPaper bag up to now, having light armor as your main defense. Having medium armor actually makes you relatively solid. You don't get shields, but I mean, medium armor, if you don't care about stealth, you can go all the way up to half plate. Which is good stuff, which usually ends up giving you 17 armor class, so that's nice. If you want to keep the stealth, you lose 1 armor class. It's simple as that. The scimitars are mostly there for flavor, I would say. At the time when the subclass released, there was no real reason to favor scimitars over short swords, in which you're already proficient by just being a bard. But nowadays, of course, it gives you access to the slasher. It's the slasher feat. Yeah, it's called the slasher feat, for which you obviously need a weapon that deals slashing damage, and the short sword and the rapier, the 2 standard bard swords, deal piercing damage. So if you want to take the slasher feature, which is pretty cool, this is going to be your option. Of course, there's other slashing weapons, but this one has finesse, is a light weapon, so you can dual wield it, you can use it with dexterity, and that pool is a lot smaller. So it's a niche net gain. But the slasher feat is pretty decent, just like the piercer feat. I love those 3 feats, by the way. They're pretty good, so if you want the slasher feat, the scimitar proficiency will help you out. Now, what else do you get? And that's under the flourish section. The Swords Bard gets a bunch of flourishes. There's 3, but we're also going to talk about what you get anyway. And that is that each time when you attack, you gain plus 10 feet movement speed. And you can still use that even if you've already used your, let's say, 30 feet of movement speed for that turn. You can still use the newly gained 10 feet to move on after your attack. So that's pretty good, actually. Of course, you might not be able to disengage, but, you know, you can run at least. You also get to use your weapons, with which you are proficient, as a casting focus. This is obviously a very important quality of life change, because if you're this cross between a martial and a caster, usually if your DM is a bit strict about it, there's a lot of hassle with putting a weapon away, pulling out your casting focus, doing the spell, and then you can't do anything again until next turn if you want to switch weapons. So here you can just point your scimitar at people and say boom baby, and stuff will happen. So that's actually a really good quality of life arrangement there. You also get a fighting style. You get choices between two fighting styles. They're logical ones, dueling and two-weapon fighting. Dueling is still +2 damage if you're only using one weapon. So if you're a rapier bard, because it's the only D8 weapon that you can use, if you're a rapier bard, dueling is going to be your good friend, and you still have an open hand for whatever you're planning to do with it, using items maybe. If you want to do two-weapon fighting, your scimitars, your short swords will be your best friend. Now, I've talked about dual wielding fighting before and have focused on the fact that it uses your bonus action quite a lot, because it's the most important part of two-weapon fighting. You always have to spend your bonus action if you want to attack with your offhand weapon. Normally, that would conflict with the bard quite a bit, because as you all know from watching my other video, using your bardic inspiration to inspire someone uses your bonus action. Not so for the swords part. You don't get free bardic inspiration actions. That's not true. But you can spend your bardic inspiration dice on the flourishes that I mentioned. There are 3 flourishes. One improves your armor class. So the idea is that when you attack and you hit, you can spend the bardic inspiration die and roll the die. You get to add the damage that you roll to your normal attack, and a second effect occurs. And this second effect does not require an extra action. You don't need to spend any actions, not a bonus action, not a reaction, to add the flourish to your attack. You can also only do 1 flourish per turn, even after you get extra attack at level 6. Jumping ahead a bit, but it's important to know. There's 3 flourishes. 1, you roll, you hit, you add the damage, and then you also add the number to your armor class. I really like this one. You don't get a shield, but I'm a big fan of defense, as you know. You don't get a shield, but this allows you to add quite a bit to your armor class for a turn. And since you're already wearing medium armor, you can easily rival a plate fighter with a shield with a decent roll of the defensive flourish. There's, I think it's called a slashing flourish, which is, again, you roll, you add the damage, and then you can deal the same damage to a second target, which is within 5 feet of the first target. So it's a little bit of a cleave action going on there. It's okay. I mean, your bardic die does grow with you as you level up, but I mean, it's not giant Nova damage, but it's a nice little bit of splash damage in your in melee range. And the second one, I think it's called Mobile Flourish. It allows you to, again, add the damage. You push an enemy 10 feet, and then you can kind of move along with the enemy. So there's some mobility added in there, and I think is it 5 feet that you can move, or no, you can move up to within 5 feet of the target. The movement that you get for yourself doesn't trigger opportunity attacks, so it's a nice way to kind of slide out of being surrounded, though it's a very niche thing, since you always have to follow the enemy that you have pushed. You can't use it as a disengage, which would be really good. Now, this sounds pretty good, sorry. I didn't study English at all. So these are pretty good, actually. The flourishes are okay. The fact that you can use your bardics to boost your own damage is pretty decent, even if you only have, if you have 20 charisma, 5 bardics per short rest starting from level 5. It's still a nice damage boost. Now, what this does do, and that's quite important to realize, it pushes the bard away from its initial core business. As you obviously again know from watching my other video, the bard is a support oriented class, which doesn't mean they can't do anything else. Holy Louie, the bard is super flexible, but the base features are very supporty oriented, and here you will not be using your bardic inspirations to help out people that often. You are going to want to be selfish and use your BIs to up your damage and add armor class or damage, more damage, or move around a bit. So if people are expecting you to hand out thumbs up and more inspirational messages like that, maybe make him clear that that is not really what the Swords Bard is all about, though you can still do it. But then if you want to dual wield, you do lose out on your bonus action and you can't chop chop. So for a dueling swords bard, it's still a good option to hand out those bardics. For a 2-weapon fighting swords bard, you're not going to be doing that a lot because you lose out on your offhand attack every time you do so. So yeah, too bad there. Also important, this is clearly a bard that wants to be a martial kind of character. He wants to get up in the front lines and hit stuff. You don't get any real spells to buff your melee prowess though, and that is a bit sad. So you would have to rely on somebody else casting haste on you, or you would have to, and that's a valid option to be honest, spend your magical secrets on picking up spells that will make you better in combat, but that will often eat up your concentration. So that's a bit of a question you have to ask yourself. Very important to note that even though this is the swords bard, nothing in the class features prevents you from doing, I'm still talking about the level 3 features here, from doing all of these with a ranged weapon. You can use the flourishes from a distance. It just says when you hit with an attack. Doesn't need to be a melee attack. You don't need to be within 5 feet of the target or whatever. So everything that I'm talking about, swords bard wise, can also be used by a swords bard with a crossbow, swords bard with a short bow, what have you. And as you know, then you might be asking, but what about the fighting styles? Well, interestingly enough, if you go for a swords bard with throwing weapons, you could still pick up the dueling dueling fighting style. The +2 damage also applies to dueling, since you will only ever have 2 attacks in a row. You're okay item interaction wise if you have, let's say, 4 daggers on yourself, maybe a few more, whatever. You're carrying around 8 daggers, it's doable, they don't weigh that much. You actually have 4 turns of throwing from a distance that you can do, and then you keep the last dagger to shank stuff until it's no longer funny, or you pull a different weapon. So this bard can actually be a ranged character without wasting the fighting style. It's slightly more optimal damage wise to do it in melee, but remember, this guy can be flexible. Use throwing weapons, ideally to keep profit from one of the fighting styles, and then just go for it. Now at level 6, I already told you, you get extra attack. Big doi, any wannabe martial is going to need to be able to attack more than once each turn, because your cantrip skill, and even though your main damaging cantrip is Vicious Mockery and it only has a d4, you need to keep up with your melee attacks. So this is actually good. 2 attacks means 2 times potential damage from ability modifiers and what have you. So this is all very good. 2 options to hit with one of your flourishes. All good stuff. Extra attack is always value. Of course, this means this focus on attacking means that the swords bard is a bit more multi-ability score dependent than other bards up to now, because you want to be able to hit stuff, so you need this decent dexterity, but you still want a very decent charisma score so that you have enough bardic inspirations to use as flourishes, and so that your spell related ability modifiers are still high enough. I mean, you're still a full caster, don't go neglecting your charisma. So this bard might not be picking up a lot of feats to at least get dexterity and charisma both up to 18 at least, I would say. I prefer my bards with charisma at 20 to get the extra bardic inspiration, but that's your own private choice. Then the level 14 one is actually a pretty good capstone here. Really good for when your bard gets dragged into longer fights or doesn't get a lot of rests in between, because as you know, your bardics reset on short rest, but it's still quite possible that you don't have any anymore of it, or you don't want to spend any on the flourishes, and then you have this one. Level 14 ability allows you to always roll a d6 instead of spending a bardic inspiration die on a flourish, and that's good. I mean, in the worst case, this means you never run out of flourishes, so each turn that you attack, you also have the option of using a flourish. Of course, you're a bard, you want to cast spells as well, so you're not going to be doing this every turn unless you've been perma-hasted by something. But in the light of you want to make your Swords Bard also quite a bit of an efficient frontline character, this is pretty good because my favorite flourish is obviously the defensive flourish, and this would mean that I can always have 1 to 6 damage extra on an attack and 1 to 6 armor class extra on an attack every turn. Of course, this Bard isn't meant to be attacking every turn. It's still it's a pretty decent capstone actually, especially for one like level 14 is relatively early for a capstone, and this is a decent one. It enhances your total package by making sure you never run out of flourishes, and that is the base feature of your class, so it's a good enhancement. In total, the Swords Bard is a tough balancing act. They're trying to turn a full caster into a half and half, let's say, but you're still a full caster. You still need the different ability modifiers to make it work. It's a tough act to balance, and I think they didn't succeed in the balance completely, which makes this a slightly weaker option than the subclasses that I talked about before. Is it bad? No, I don't think so. You still have the large array of bardic spells that you can always use. You can use your magical secrets to pump up your efficiency in close combat, and that's really a possibility. Pick up haste and already you are a lot more capable. Having the extra attack, having the fighting style there, the dueling can really add up if you can attack 3 times in a row. But I think it is the bardic subclass that I think is the weakest overall. It's not bad, it will do, but it is certainly weaker than every other bard class out there right now, but I do love the flavor. There we are. That is the Swords Bard all done. That means we are now moving on to the Valour Bard. So the Valour Bard, possibly flavor-wise my most favorite bard out there. They're the warrior scouts. They're the guys in the front lines smacking people around and singing songs while doing so. I love that flavor. How do they keep alive in the front line? Very simple. They get medium armor as shields and martial weapons. Now the medium armor, just like the Swords Bard, good stuff. Shields add +2 armor class. And since you don't get fighting styles, there's really no reason not to pick up the shields. And you get martial weapons. Now, martial weapons, at least for melee purposes, this doesn't matter because you already get rapier proficiency, and as a bard you don't want to invest in strength, so all the other weapons really don't matter. But this also means you get access to the martial ranged weapons, and that's actually really good. The Valour Bard is probably better with a bow than up front, but I just like the idea of this dwarven bard with a warhammer and a shield, banging on a shield like a drum and smacking people around, but that's just me. So you get the option to build a really strong ranged bard and a really durable melee bard. What does your bardic inspiration thingy do here? It's called combat inspiration. It's very simple. The person who receives your bardic inspiration can use it to add the damage to a weapon attack roll or to their own armor class when they're being attacked. And I think that's where the real value lies here. The weapon damage is nice if they see an opportunity. If they roll a crit, for example, adding the bardic inspiration die means that you get to add it twice, so that at that point it becomes really valuable potentially. But I think the real value here is in being able to up your armor class against an incoming attack. I always found it weird, and I've said this before, that when Tasha's came out and they gave bards the options to also add their bardic inspirations to spell damage or healing value, that they didn't give this to the Valour Bard exclusively. I mean, it would not make him overpowered at all. It would make him a bit better, more supporty actually. And it would make sense because they're the subclass that can buff weapon damage. So why not spell damage and healing as well? Just make them the buff roll output class, subclass. Oh well, that's just me, baby. It's a nice way of handing out inspiration. The armor class might help especially. Level 6, same as for the Sword Bard, you get extra attack. Huzzah, 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 of course, for all the same reasons. Again, you won't necessarily be attacking every turn, but when you don't want to cast a spell, like a big spell, this might be better than casting Vicious Mockery. You might deal more damage and actually kill something. So it's good. Extra attack is always good. Level 14 is a very simple ability. I forgot the name, but it basically says that when you cast a spell, you also get a weapon attack. And that's good. That's very good, actually. It adds a nice bit of damage. Even when you're casting non-damagey spells, by the way. You could be casting Hypnotic Pattern over there and whacking somebody on your right. So even when you weren't planning on attacking and dealing damage in a turn, because you're casting, I don't know, you picked up Healing Word, and Cure Wounds, whatever, you're doing something very supporty and defensive, you can still whack somebody over there. And that's really nice. It keeps you engaged in combat, and I think that's a fun playstyle. This also is the reason why the Valour Bard is probably better with ranged weaponry than with melee weapons, if you want to orient towards damage a bit more, because this gives you more flexibility. It doesn't matter where you stand, really. If I'm Cure Wounding somebody here, I can't whack someone 20 feet away. Maybe if I have a throwing weapon, of course, that works. That's always a good option, but again, ranged. Whereas if you're using some big, bad crossbow and you're Cure Wounding the same chap, you can shoot somebody else in the head. That being said, don't use Cure Wounds. Overall, the Valour Bard is a very nice defensively oriented bard that stands strong in the overall list of bardic subclasses. It really does. It's a bit weaker than the best. Let's say if Lore is one of the better bard subclasses, Valour will be slightly under it, but not by much. I mean, it's a strong subclass. It keeps your bard alive. Medium armor keeps stuff alive. And then the last thing we're talking about is the College of Whispers, and this is a bit of a special bard. I think it functions best in a campaign where you know there's going to be some room for intrigue, of course. If the campaign is only going to be dungeon delving, you might not get the most out of this subclass. Now, they do have a combat feature, of course. It's called Psychic Blades, and basically when you hit something, you can expend the Bardic Inspiration die to deal more damage. We've heard this before, the Swords Bard also does this, but here it's 2d6, so you can stab someone with a dagger and add greatsword damage. That's pretty okay, actually. And the damage increases. It becomes 3d6 at level 5, and then 5d6 at level 10, and 8d6 at level 15. So this actually scales pretty well. I mean, at level 15, I think your Bardic is already a D10 or a D12, potentially even. Handing out a D12 to gain fireball damage on one target is decent damage boost. But again, this is taking your Bard away from helping people what their base design is. But it kind of makes sense again for this subclass as well. At least here the damage buff is really relevant. You hand out a smaller die to get a lot of D6s, so that works. This is their only real obvious combat ability, because everything else they get takes a bit of time and has no isn't usable in combat. You have Words of Terror at level 3, the other ability, and it's cool. I mean, if you spend a minute talking to someone, you can have them make I think it's a wisdom save, and if they fail, they'll be frightened for an entire hour, which is great before combat, of course, but you can't talk for a minute during combat because that's 10 turns, so that's not going to work. But this works outside of combat. Your Bard can be really intimidating. Obviously, College of Whispers are those gatherer of secrets. They blackmail people. They're kind of, if you want to play an evil Bard, College of Whispers is a very logical pick for a theme. But you could play this theme with a better Bard subclass if you're doing a lot of combat. If there's a lot of social interaction in your campaign, this is going to rise in power level. And if they succeed on their saving throw, always very important, they won't know that you were trying to terrorize them with your words. And that is a very valuable thing to have, because a lot of the lower level mind control spells, and I think even some of the higher ones, leave your target very aware that you were trying to hex them into obeying them. Level 6 gives you Mantle of Whispers. If something humanoid dies within 30 feet of you, you can absorb, you can capture their shadow. and then you can use the shadow to pull it over you, and you will turn into this person when they were alive. You will gain their basic knowledge, if that makes sense. You won't gain access to their deepest secrets, but you will gain enough information about this person to pass for this person. You will know where they live, you will know the names of their wife, children, husband, what have you. You will not know their deepest, darkest secret. So again, a very good ability in social environments when you're trying to impersonate people, but in combat this is going to be, well, maybe not entirely useless, but I mean, you can use it, you can pop on the disguise as an action, but it would require no enemy being able to spot you at that time. Because obviously, if I'm standing in combat as my Tabaxi Bard and suddenly I turn into a gnome king or whatever, it's going to show. People are going to notice. But outside of combat, this is really good. You can only keep one shadow per short or long rest. So you can't kill 50 people, take all their shadows, and then put on a puppet show where you play all the puppets. That's not an option. Damn it. And then the last one, Shadow Lore, is kind of a really heavy mind control. You know, that's the theme here. Influencing people and making them do your bidding. If a target fails a wisdom save against you, they think you know their deepest, darkest secret, and for the next 8 hours they will obey you as if you are a very close friend, being very frightened that otherwise you will reveal that secret. Now, you don't actually learn the secret, but they think you did. So this gives you a mind-controlled thrall for about 8 hours. It won't do combat for you unless it was already inclined to do so. So this is a very powerful control feature, because again, it leaves no trace. When the effect ends, they will have no idea why they were so afraid of you. They'll be like, I have no reason to be afraid of this Tabaxi Bard. They look pretty nice, actually. So the feature disguises itself a bit. It doesn't hold concentration. It doesn't use spell slots. You can only use it once per long rest. It's a pretty powerful mind control feature, but again, it's very niche in its use, and that sums up the Whisper Bard very well. So basically, if you're playing a social interaction heavy campaign, the Whisper Bard rises in value. Otherwise, I think it lies below the Swords Bard when you're playing a combat-y campaign, because it only has one damagey feature, which does a lot of damage, let's be honest there. I mean, it's good. It does decent damage for a non-damagey subclass, but that's the only shtick it has. Of course, you have the full repertoire of Bard spells, don't worry, but subclass-wise, it's very niche. And there we are, ladies and gentlemen, that is all that I had to talk about for today. I've completed my trip through everything connected to the Bard. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it helps you. I was really glad to learn a few weeks ago again that my Bard role-playing guide actually is still helping people play their Bard. I hope this does the same for people who want to play Swords of Valor or Whisper Bards. See you later. Hopefully in 2 weeks I'll see you again in the Attic Dungeon.